Hey folks, today we are going to start a composition task looking at composing a melody. We've done composition before in school and we've looked a lot at composing things like chord sequences and composing drum beats and bass lines and varied textures and different sections, but we haven't spent loads of time thinking about just the tune, what makes a good tune. And writing a really good melody is really tricky. Okay, it's something that's quite hard, and so we're going to spend a bit of time on it in this project and write some amazing new pieces. So we are going to start off by listening to a melody, listening to another piece and thinking about what makes it good, okay, because that will help us be when we're actually composing our own. So we're going to, like this chap on the screen here, this is you now, thinking about this melody. There you are with your lockdown haircut, considering the tune. Okay, right, here we go. This is the piece we're going to listen to. It's by Mozart. Mozart is a famous classical composer who I'm sure you will have heard of. We're going to learn more about Mozart in future lessons. Mozart wrote great melodies. Okay, the classical era, which we'll talk about again in another lesson, was all about great tunes, and Mozart was the king of great tunes. This is called Sonata number 11 in A major. It's a theme and variations movement, which means that this first tune that you're going to hear, this first theme, which you can see on the screen, it goes up to there. That's the whole thing on the screen. What happens after this is it basically just does different variations of the whole of that tune over and over again, sometimes in minor, sometimes with loads of ornamentation. It's very much, I very much recommend listening to the whole thing if you enjoy this tune, because it is great. It's one of my favourites, and great for those of you who did a theme and variations for the last project to kind of hear how Mozart does it. Anyway, let's have a listen to this theme. Let's start off from the top, just having a listen to the whole thing. And when you're listening to it, I want you to think about what the different sections are in the theme. Like, if you were to break this up into bits, how many bits would it be? I will move my mouse on top so you can try and follow the music as we go. Here we go. Then it repeats again from the top. Now into carrying on to here. And then that repeats again as well from here, but we'll leave that there. So there we go. There is the piece, the theme. Start off by how many different sections do you think are there of this theme? Shout it out now. I'm listening. Good, you're right, I imagine. Right, well, you might have spotted there's maybe two main sections that are obvious because of the repeat bars. So the first whole section here is then repeated again, and then the second whole section is repeated again. So you could say, as a broad overview, you've got 1-2 sections. But let's look into this a little bit more detail. The first section here starts with the first little melodic idea, which goes... Oh, put that back onto piano. There we go, that's the first little tune. That then is played again a little bit lower, which is sequenced downwards, but we'll look at that in a second. But that happens again. That little tune happens again, and it happens right here at bar 5. Again, it goes... I keep hitting that wrong note, but there we go. So it plays twice. It plays again with just a slightly different ending at the end. Then it also plays again at bar 13. So you get this same pattern of these first 2 bars with then slightly different endings each time. Happen 1, 2, 3 times. And the bit here in the middle is almost like an extra section where something new happens. So you could say that this theme goes A, which is the first 4 bars with a bit of an ending here, then A again, and A then has a different ending here. Then you get the B section, which is slightly different. It's got some different things going on. And then when we get to bar 13, we're back to A again, back to A, but with a slightly different ending here, which is then extended from an extra 2 bars. Let's just listen to the whole piece one more time, and I'll say those sections, and I want you to think of what's different about the A theme every time it happens, and what's different about the B theme. Here we go. A theme. There's the ending. A theme again. Here's a different ending. And then we get, of course, the A theme again up here. So think about what makes the A theme different. What's the difference in those 2 endings? Here's the first ending. What does it sound like? Here's the second ending. There we go. So what you hopefully might have noticed is that this ending here sounds not quite finished. It almost sounds like a comma when it goes when it does this kind of top bit, which and it finishes there. And it's like, that's not finished. It's like a pause for a second, then it carries on with the next bit. Okay, and carries on to the new section. But this time, the ending here feels a lot more finished when it goes and then finishes with basically some chords that go. Sorry, I'm sorry reading this. There we go, which feels a lot more complete and finished at the end of this section. So the reason for that, you may have been screaming at the computer, I hope, is that there are different cadences. The first one finishes on a unfinished cadence, or on a half cadence, or on a what we call them, imperfect cadence. There we go, various different names for them, imperfect cadence, whereas the second time it finishes on a perfect cadence. The key is A major, okay, so we're in A major. There we go, says it in the top as well. And this part here finishes on the 5 chord. The 5 chord, if we count along from A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is E, so the 5 chord is E major. There it is, and you can see that this note here, in the bass clef, you've got an E, and in the top part here, there's a slight sort of suspension where it plays and then lands on E, G sharp and B. So lands on a E major chord, which feels, when you finish on a imperfect cadence, it feels unfinished, like a comma. And at the end here, it goes from an E to an A in the bass and an E chord and an A chord in the right hand, just to make it feel really, really finished. There we go. So the main difference in that first A section and the second A section is the cadences. This middle section here is slightly different. Have a listen, think about what's different about this middle section. Here we go. So this has got some new ideas in, hasn't it? It's new ideas that we haven't heard before. The accompaniment changes. It hasn't got the same accompaniment as it had before. It has a different kind of accompaniment style here, and the tune is new as well. It uses a dotted rhythm, so it actually starts in a similar way to the first one, because the first tune goes, and then the second tune at the start of the B section goes. So it's actually not a million miles away. It is still a sequence of the first tune, but it is going in a different area with a bit of a different ending, and it finishes on 2 E's in the left hand, and again that same kind of suspension in the right hand, leading to an E major chord with this G sharp and B in the top. So it finishes on an E major like that, which is another imperfect cadence, which wants to continue to the final A section here. Have a listen to this final A section and decide what cadence you think it finishes on, perfect or imperfect. Here we go. we go. And it sounds at the end like it's finished, doesn't it? Because it finishes with another perfect cadence, which is going to go from an E major and then to this A major chord there. Okay, so it finishes with that A major. So what we've got here is we've got this tune which is broken up into 3 sections. We've got A again, but with a different ending. B, new ideas, still based on the first, and then A again with a different ending on a perfect cadence. And the cadences in each section go, in this section here, we've got an imperfect cadence, then we've got a perfect cadence, then we've got an imperfect cadence, then we've got a perfect cadence. Right, that is a lot of analysis of this song, and what it shows us though is that this is a great tune. Okay, I really love this piece and I definitely recommend having a look at it. You could even, piano players might even want to learn to play this theme. It's really nice and it's not too tricky, despite that I've been mangling a little bit myself today. Have a go at it because it's good fun. It's got, my favourite bit, right, is it's got this lovely, you see this note here, this E, all the way through this first few bars. It's got this almost like a drone note of E played over and over again. It's just lovely. Anyway, so this piece is a great example of making a catchy tune, and I'm sure you could sing it back to me now. So we're going to use our ideas from that. We're going to use the ideas of coming up with that structure to come up with our own theme. So your task for this project is to compose a leitmotif for a character. We've been doing music from stage and screen. We're looking at Defying Gravity at the moment, and a leitmotif is basically like a theme tune for a character, which is commonly used in film music, but also in stage music as well. And sometimes a song that might be performed by a character, little echoes of that song will come back at various other points within the musical. So I want you to choose a character to give a leitmotif to. And leitmotif is just a fancy word for theme tune, okay? A fancy word for leitmotif. Some examples of leitmotifs. In Star Wars, Darth Vader's leitmotif goes da 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 da. Harry Potter's leitmotif goes da 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 da, etc. And I'm sure you can think of many more. So we're going to come up with a leitmotif for a character. So you're going to have to choose a character. Here's some examples. You can choose any characters you like. It could be from a play like Romeo and Juliet, from a book that you're reading perhaps in English. It could be from a film. Obviously I've put a couple of superhero Marvel characters on here as well. It could be from a TV show, from a Disney film, whatever you like. It's completely up to you. Bit of Doctor Who up there. It's up to you. You're going to choose a character. The best thing I'd say though is don't choose a character who's already got their own theme tune, okay? Because it'll be hard to come up with a new Harry Potter theme because the Harry Potter theme's so good. So try and think of a character who hasn't already got a theme. For my example, I'm of course going to choose an Avengers character. It seemed only right, and I was thinking of what character maybe doesn't already have a theme, might be an interesting one to give a theme to. So I'm going to go for the character of Hawkeye. For anyone who's not particularly familiar with the Avengers films, first, watch them, please. What are you doing? They're great. And secondly, Hawkeye is a character. He's a hero. He's a heroic character. He's one of the Avengers, but he shoots arrows. So he's a bit unlike some of the other characters with all their superpowers. He just shoots arrows. There he is. They're jumping off a building, shooting arrows. So I had to think then about what I would like my character to be like. I want my theme to sound heroic, grand, and impressive because he's a hero, okay? And then I want it to also think about use of arrows, okay? Like to think if there's any way musically that I can describe arrows flying around, okay? And I came up with just a couple of ideas. When you hear the theme, you'll hear some of these ideas that I've put in there. Firstly, I thought that having big leaps like sixths and sevenths and octaves might be a good way to depict arrows flying like this, or there we go. So these big kind of leaps might almost be like an arrow flying from one place to another. I also thought a good thing to describe arrows would be like some variation of the William Tell theme, which is the one that goes da-da-dum 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 dum-dum da-da-dum 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 dum-dum da-da-dum 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 dum-dum da-da-dum dum-dum. Now that's obviously already a melody and I'm not going to use that, but if I could like maybe evoke a similar feel to that, that might make us feel like, because William Tell was famous as an archer shooting arrows, that might make us feel like we've got that association with arrows. So I'm not going to copy that, but I might use some rhythms from it, for example. Right, your first thing to do then is to compose is to come up with what character you'd like to do. I like to think of a character, think of some words to describe that character, just like I've done there, and think of some musical ideas that you can use to create your theme. So pause the video here, think of what your character is going to be, write some stuff down, and then come on back. Okay, now you have come up with your ideas for what your character is going to be. We're going to start composing our initial idea. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I missed this slide before, but hopefully within your ideas of how you're going to create your character, you might think about what instruments you're going to use, the pitches, high or low, long or short note durations, whether that makes it feel like your character, whether different melodic, harmonic, like chords, would it be major or minor, or different rhythmic ideas might help there. If you need to now add some more stuff to your ideas, please do. Right, I'm going to break down how to put together your theme to describe your character. But before we do, let's just have a little listen to my Hawkeye theme. Here it comes. There we go. I'm sorry, it's a bit big. I wonder if I can fit it in the screen. Not really is the answer. Okay, oh yeah, there we go. So I'm going to play it for you now, and what I want you to notice is a couple of things. Firstly, notice those these little repeated quavers here, which go dum da da. So this rhythm here is dum da da dum da da, and that's my kind of William Tell thing, because William Tell is da da dum da da dum. And so I like reversed it. So rather than da-da-dum, I went dum-da-da. But I think that hopefully just using something that's a bit similar will kind of evoke my my arrow-like theme. And also, I've got some big leaps in here. Mostly, melodies are going to be more stepwise than this. But because leaps is a character feature of my theme, I've included some big loops like here and here, which will almost sound like this, flying arrows. Let's have a listen to it. Here we go. So the cheesy note flight sounds notwithstanding, hopefully that gives you a vague idea of what this theme to create the kind of feeling of that character could come across like. I'm going to break it down now and show you how I did it and get you to do it yourself. So the first thing I did, and this is where it's all going to start, just like when Mozart started by coming up with the very first theme idea, which was, I came up with just one bar. And that's the key here, is to start off by coming up with just one bar of tune where everything else is going to come from. You'll need to think about a few things for your piece here. You'll need to think about what key you want to do it in, and you'll need to think about what time signature and tempo you're going to use. Now you can be a bit adventurous. Mozart decided to use 6/8 for his time signature and A major for his key signature. You can be a bit adventurous. If you're not sure, like, this is just a learning piece, okay? This is really, when we compose this, I'm not necessarily asking you to do something completely revolutionary and unheard of before. When we're learning a piece, we're going to try and think about simplicity, really, to try and get these ideas down, because it may be that then next year you want to use these ideas to create your final piece, and perhaps you'll go a little bit more complex. But I can't emphasize enough that sticking with simplicity here will really help you out. So if you want to do it in C major, which I have, please do. There is nothing wrong with writing in C major. Some amazing pieces have been. Major is easier to write in than minor, because there's a few more considerations, but if you want to write in minor, you can. There's just a couple of extra things to think about, which I'll tell you as we go along. So the final thing to think about when you're writing your first bar, oh yeah, and 4/4 time signature is by far the easiest to write in. It's the one we're probably most used to, but you could write in 3/4 if you want to change that, or you could try different compound time signatures if you're feeling adventurous, but nothing wrong with C major 4/4. That's what I say. Things to do. In your first bar, make sure that your first note is definitely in your tonic chord. So my first chord is C major. Okay, and so my first note has got to be either C, E, or G. okay, and that will help us when we're coming to harmonizing it later. So I've gone for an E, and I've gone for a long E for 2 beats. And then I've gone for this leap downwards, going down to that G, those kind of like William Tell-like patterns here. Now my thing involves a massive leap, okay, because that's a feature of my melody, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend going straight in with huge leaps. What makes things sound melodic is stepwise movement, and you'll see that later on in my piece I use lots of stepwise movement to make it catchy. So I would recommend within your first bar coming up with simple pattern of notes that are probably stepwise for the most part, definitely starting on something from your tonic chord. And yeah, simplicity is the key here. Keep it simple. Remember that Mozart's first idea was only a few notes. He didn't do anything too crazy. He used just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes. That's the first part, okay? So once you come up with your initial idea, we're then going to decide what we want to do with it next. Now, what I did was I actually added an upbeat, or what we call an anacrusis. An upbeat comes just before the bar, and it kind of leads into the first bar, because I sort of wanted to lead into with that William Tell. So my first bar is, but to lead into it, I add in a da, 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 and then. Okay, so that's the kind of upbeat there. Now, for bar 2, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. For bar 2, what Mozart does is he sequences his idea, and sequencing is a great way to link melodic ideas together. The sequence that Mozart does is takes this tune and just moves it all down one. That's a great way to link your next idea. So I would recommend that your bar 2 is either exactly the same as bar 1, and nothing wrong with repetition, a sequence of that idea, so the exact same thing moved up or down, or just a slight variation. I've gone for a very slight variation. What I've basically done is I've repeated the whole bar, but I've moved this note up 1, okay? And ultimately what I'm doing here as well is I'm using my ears, I'm listening, and I'm seeing what is going to sound good. So my second bar, my first bar was, bar 2 is exactly the same, little William Tell rhythms, but with this different first note. Then for bar 3, we want something a bit different, okay? Bar 3, we're not just going to repeat it again, it'll get boring. Something a bit different, but if you can use any borrowed ideas from the first bar, borrowed ideas are great because they help musically link things together. What Mozart does for bar 3 is he goes... Okay, so it does this kind of rising pattern. It doesn't use this dotted rhythm from the first couple of bars, but it uses the second half of the bar. So it uses this crotchet quaver, and it just does it twice. With mine, what I've done is I've used the William Tell rhythm again. I've used da 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 da, and then I've used the William Tell rhythm again to go. Okay, and it's kind of a modified sequence here, because I've got the first idea, and then sequence downwards. It says modified sequence because it's not exactly the same intervals. I used a slightly different top note there just because using my ears I thought that sounded a bit nicer. And then finally in bar 4, the last bar of this section, you're going to add in your cadence. And your cadence means that we haven't added the chords yet, but we're going to use the last notes of the bar to imply the 5 chord. So if you're in the key of C major, which I am, and you may be too, the 5 chord is C, D, E, F, G, is G major. G has 3 notes in it, G, B, and D. So I'm going to use G or B or D as my last note or couple of notes in the bar. And here's what I've done. I've used some William Tell at the start, so it kind of reverses the rhythms in this last one. On a C going, and then I've added these, and those last 2 notes, B, G, kind of imply a G major chord, okay? So it finishes on a G major there. So my first 4 bars then go da, 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 da. There we go, there's my first section, and it feels nice and complete. Now bar 5 to 8 is going to be exactly the same, okay, exactly the same, but just with a slightly different ending, okay? That it's important to have repetition in music because it makes it catchy. So having something exactly the same is really going to help you link your things together. What I will do is play it for you. So here's bars 5 to 8. It goes exactly the same. So the only thing different is this last bar here, where instead of going, what it does is it goes da 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 da, and that bit at the end there feels really finished. And the reason it does is that B, this note just before the last note, is from the chord of G major, the 5 chord, and C is of course from the chord of C major, the 1 chord. So I've created a sort of implied, even though I haven't got any chords in yet, perfect cadence by going da 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 at the end, and that feels really like the end of the section. I know there's a couple of notes here, but that links to the next bit. So once you've composed bars 1 to 4, 5 to 8 is really easy. You just copy and paste it and do a slightly different ending so it finishes on a 1 chord or a note from the 1 chord. Now the next section of music, bars 9 to 12, should be something new, but it should also come up with something. It should also link to the main idea. It needs to be part of the same piece, but it should also be contrasting in some way. So here's some ways you can do it. You could use faster or slower rhythms than the original. If you've used a lot of fast rhythms, then you could do some more slower rhythms. You could start on a different note from the original. You could even, if you want to. I've decided that I'm going to start on the A because my original starts on the C, implying a C major chord, which starts on an E of that chord. And I thought if I start on the A, that means when I get to adding chords in, this could be a minor section, okay, which to make it sound a bit different. And you could travel in a different direction. If the first one generally went up, maybe this one could generally go down. If the first one uses more leaps, could this one use more steps, or vice versa? And actually that's what I've done. I've decided to make mine much more stepwise because I was worried my first theme was just a bit too leapy. So this is my first little melodic idea. It goes, and what you might notice is this little rhythm here, da 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 da, is familiar because it's that little William Tell pattern again. So I borrowed a tiny idea from the first bar that I created, but my new bar goes, and there we go. Now, what I did for the next bars of this section is I followed the exact same pattern that I did with the first section. That's bar 1 is your initial idea. Bar 2 is a repetition or a sequence or variation, so it's really similar. Bar 3 is something new, and bar 4 is the cadence. And in this cadence, well, we'll come to that in a second. Let's have a listen to it. So the first bit goes, then I do that whole thing exactly the same but lower. There we go, so there's my sequence. Something new. This is, I wanted to get some more shooting arrows in there, so I put some octaves going. There we go, some big arrow shots. And then the last thing, every single note in this bar is a G. Because I want it to feel like an imperfect cadence. I want it to feel like it's gonna take us back to the tonic when we go into the next few bars. So bars 9 to 12, exactly the same as bars 1 to 2 in that you're coming up with an initial idea, then a sequence or variation or repetition, something slightly different here, and then an ending, a cadence, and it should be an imperfect cadence on the finishing on the dominant for this section. And finally, the last part of your theme. These could be and should be exactly the same as bars 5 to 8. Just like Mozart in the piece we were listening to at the start there, he goes back at bar 13 to exactly the same thing as the start, but just with a different ending. So this is what's going to happen at the end of my section. Finish on a big tonic note. So I'm going to finish on a C, okay, and it's going to finish on a long note as well. That's important so it feels really finished. So my bars 13 to 16 goes, and that finish there is actually really similar to the finish of the previous section. It's just that you hold the C for a bit longer to make it feel really, really finished. And there we go, 16 great bars of music. From here you could extend it further, and we will, so we're going to look at extending it further next time to describe differing elements of your character's personality. We're also going to look at harmonising this melody and putting some chords behind it, but as long as you've got the basic patterns of having your cadences in the right place, then you actually harmonising it will be nice and easy. So That is your task for today. I would like you to come up with 16 bars of music. You're going to use Noteflight as you've done before, and at the end of the lesson you're going to send me both a PDF and an MP3 of your project. You can do that like this. If you go to Noteflight, you'll see, hopefully, if I just make the window a bit bigger, oh, it's because I've not got it right. If you press stop, there we go, you'll see this little cloud. There we go. This cloud is to export your theme, and you can export it as a PDF so I can see the music, and export it as an MP3 so I can hear the sound. And if you could send me both of those things, both a PDF and an MP3, then I can have a little bit of a listen. And I will give you some feedback. So don't worry if you're like, oh, I don't think it sounds very good or whatever. Just have a go, see if you can create your first theme, and I will give you some feedback, and we'll be developing this over a few weeks. This isn't the only week we're going to do it. Right, let's finish off. I'm just going to play the theme one more time, and I'm just going to talk over the top of it just to remind you of what's happening at all the points so you can then get off and compose your own. Here we go. So we start with an anacrusis or upbeat, then into the first idea, which is basically where all the ideas come from. Here we go. A section. New idea here. Ending on an imperfect cadence. Back to the A section again. Ending on a perfect cadence. B section. Something new here. It's a bit minor. Flying arrows. Big dominant chord. Back to the A section again. And get ready for the big ending. Perfect cadence. There we go, and that is the end. Right, I hope you've enjoyed having a listen. I hope you will enjoy composing your own, and I'm very much looking forward to hear it. If you have any problems, please do email me, okay? This is difficult because in real life I'd be able to come round and help you out and give you ideas, but I'm happy for you to just send me your first bar, if you like, within the week, and let me have a listen and give you some thoughts and ideas on it. That is completely fine. So send over anything. Please don't feel like you have to struggle alone. This is tricky and difficult, so please let me know if you need any help. Right, thanks. Good luck. Bye.